I don't spend a lot of time in thrift shops. That was something my dad liked to do. Two things he could never pass up. One was a Western or a war movie on television. The second was a thrift shop. But on occasion, I have gone in thrift shops, not looking for cameras, often for looking for something else. Usually it was very specific. So in Pittsburgh one time, there was a thrift shop. It was on Ohio River Boulevard, Route 65. There was a thrift shop near the Eaton Park. Anyway, I did find this camera, and we'll take a look and see what's inside. So I noted that the original price on this was $89.95. So that was quite costly when this camera was released, which, as you can see, is the FX3 automatic. So the date for this camera appears to be from 1956 to 1958, so that's a fairly narrow window. I thought it might have been the early 1960s, but apparently production of this camera ended before then. This lacks many of the modern conveniences that we would expect from today's cameras, and a lot of those conveniences, of course, came from the Japanese line of single lens reflex cameras. So even though this is really marked as single lens reflex camera, it's not what we would consider to be that really modern camera. So let's take a look at it. This camera is unique in that it came with this Meyer-Optik Primoplan. It's either Primoplan, or Primoplan. So take your poison or pick your best shot, and that's the one we'll go with. A lot of these you'll see with the Jenna Biotar. So this is a bit unique. This camera, as you can see, fairly large size. It did not come with the original papers. However, it did come with this guarantee, and it listed the serial the body serial number and the lens serial number. So the body serial number is printed somewhere. Oh, well, here's somewhere somebody scratched their name or their identification number into the camera. Always wish they wouldn't do that, but not much you can do about it. Let me figure out where the body serial number might be. And I don't see it. However, I'm looking fairly quickly, and I just don't see it. Anyway, if we look at the lens serial number, which is 1573253, you'll see it does in fact match this 137253. So we could assume that this body is original, or this lens is original to this body, at least as it was sold. Somewhere in the house I have the original lens cap. I just couldn't find it. I don't know what happened to it. As you can see, the lens itself is in very good condition. The body is a bit different. As I mentioned, even though it is marked as single lens reflex, we don't really think of it as being equivalent to what we would consider a modern day single lens reflex. Reflex meaning that there is a mirror in there. So this is, of course, would be a 42 millimeter screw mount. And as you can see, this in fact does have a mirror. So it offers reflex viewing, making it qualify as a single lens reflex camera. It does not have a pentaprism built in. However, it does have a little magnifier that flips downward to allow for more precise focusing. Now, real quickly about the lens. This would use what would be called a preset aperture. So how the preset aperture works is you would select your desired aperture ahead of time by pulling this ring outward and rotating this collar until you find the aperture that you plan to use. So let's say we're planning to use f11. You would rotate, after dropping this back down into place, you would rotate your aperture ring until the lens was fully open, like so. Then you would focus, then you would take the aperture ring and you would turn it until it stopped. Notice now it's stopping at your desired aperture, which is of f11, and you can see how that looks. This, of course, would cause the image in your viewfinder to darken, but it's only going to darken momentarily because shortly afterward you should release the shutter. Then you can manually turn the aperture back to its full open position, which in this case is 1.9. This is all metal. This is light alloy. So being light alloy, you'll often see a lot of pitting or discoloration of the lens barrels. In this case, this is pretty well taken care of. I'm not sure how much this was used because there's not a lot of wear to the lens. There was a lot of haze on all of the elements, which I cleaned. This had one of these quirky East German shutters, and so you'll notice there are two arrows here, and then you have this red arrow. So if you wanted if you wanted to use your faster speeds, for example, in fact, you would then lift and turn this collar until you find your desired shutter speed. So you'll see the small indicator, this small red dot, to indicate what shutter speed you're using. Now, if you are using one of your slower shutter speeds, which are marked in red, you would then take this small arrow and turn it to the red one. That then enables your slow speed escapement to give you your slow shutter speeds. Note that this was sort of peculiar to these cameras. At some point, with their next version of SLRs, they stopped using this. I'm not sure if they stopped it on the LTL series, but those were more traditional SLRs, more modern, I think, to compete with what would soon be coming from Japan. So to raise your pop-up viewfinder, there's a small button on the back. Press it, and that pops into place. Remember, this did not have rapid return mirror, so once you press your shutter release, the mirror raised and stayed raised until you advance the film to the next frame. Top speed on this was 1/500th of a second. I don't know if there were any made that had a top speed of 1/1000th of a second. It's doubtful, given the time period when this was produced. You'll notice that this was produced in Germany, but this really was produced in East Germany. Some of these cameras will be emblazoned on the bottom, made in occupied East Germany, or made in USSR occupied East Germany. This one does not have that. As you can see, somebody hasn't scratched the serial number into the back of the camera, and I've already stated how I feel about that. Briefly, don't really care for it, don't like it. This has a front-mounted shutter release, which most of the Prakticas had, really. Well, you know what? There were so many Praktica models, and then there was a Praktina, and several others. But most of them had a front-mounted shutter release. Although eventually they went to one that was more angled. Like its earliest cameras, this used a 42mm screw mount, which meant that it could take nearly any lens. I'm not going to say every lens because there will always be some lenses in which the rear element protrudes too far back for the mirror to be raised or lowered correctly. The size of this camera, it's fairly wide. I think we could call this a full-size camera. This really was meant to be operated peering down into the viewfinder. Some of the earlier cameras had a prism viewfinder that could be attached to this. I don't think it will fit this particular camera. The earlier FX1 model had this that was provided as an option. As I mentioned, I don't think it'll fit this camera, but let's see. Will it? No, in fact, it will not. There should be, the earlier cameras had a little notch right here. And so how it would work is it would simply push into the body, and then you would peer in through this eyepiece. If you think this looks a little clunky, it certainly is. It also offered a very dim view. Not great. So the earliest cameras, which were the Pentacon, well, the Contax and then renamed Pentacon, those cameras had a true eye-level 35mm SLR experience. I'm not sure why they didn't move forward with that with the earliest Praktica cameras. Perhaps it was a lack of pentaprisms, available pentaprisms in East Germany. Remember, in East Germany, everything, a lot of things were determined by the state, the government. That would include things like production targets and certainly labor, allotted labor and such. This is, it's a fairly decent, I think it's a decently made camera. It's not the greatest camera ever, but, For what it is, it's very decent. This has a removable back to load film. And this uses a cloth shutter. Can't tell if this cloth shutter probably rubberized on the front, not on the back. This one happens to be in good shape, this shutter. And that would lead me to believe that it wasn't used that often. I think it was probably used moderately. There's not a lot of scuff. There's a little tiny bit of scuffing right here. But otherwise, I think this camera is in really excellent shape. You can see there's no staining or degrading of this aluminum part here. We just call it, it's often referred to as light alloy because we're, I don't think anybody knows exactly what alloy it is. I think the assumption is it probably was some type of aluminum, but it's just referred to as light alloy within the camera collectors groups. To reattach the back, simply hook this on the back, press the two together, and there you go. There's not a whole lot of things to service in this camera. I think you probably have to remove the bottom plate to do a bit of work, and you can see how the covering has lifted slightly on this side. The covering is tightly bonded here. This has a number 1, and the number 1 was supposed to indicate that it was of a higher quality than other products. So what about this lens? Today this lens is in demand. It's sort of funny how things fall in and out of favor. There was a time when you could probably buy these for about $10 each, $10 or $12 each. That probably would have been like in the 1990s or so, really leading up through and beyond the going digital phase, and when everybody was dumping their film cameras at bargain prices. I think I want to say I paid like $9.95 for this for the entire thing. Of course, it being a thrift shop, they wouldn't sell the body and the lens separately. I either paid $7.95 or $9.95. In any case, it was. I think we can consider that to be a real bargain. This did not come with it. I haven't shot this camera. I have shot with this lens on a digital body, of course, on the Sony, because that Sony is a real workhorse for me. In this case, I want to say I shot it on the NEX7, because that would have been before I had before I owned the other camera, before I owned the full frame Alpha 7. You know what's interesting? On some of the bodies, I believe I had an earlier camera. In fact, let me go look at it. Okay, so this is a camera that I've used for many years to set infinity focus on a manual focus lens. That is, recollimate the lens. Now, this is a Vivitar 200mm lens. I think this is in what they call a TX mount, which means that you could literally adapt this to another camera by removing, it's been a while since I actually tried this, by removing the lens mount. This would allow you then to put a different lens mount on the camera. And so in this case, it's a 42, meaning universal 42mm screw mount. But, I'm not really here to talk about that. I really want to talk about the body. So what's unusual about this is you're going to notice a period right here, F.X3, whereas this one is FX3. Sort of odd, right? I think this is an earlier camera. Now remember, this has the same thing. It has a shutter speed marked in red. This one has a diamond-shaped badge, KW, and that would be the manufacturer. I can't remember what that is, but that would be the facility where this was produced. As you can see, this camera is in much better condition. This one definitely was a user camera, but it's fine for what it is. Same thing. Both have little swing down viewfinders to help you focus. This has been very helpful, this little swing down magnifier, I should say, swing down magnifier. It's been very helpful in setting in infinity focus on other lenses. So I've always wondered why this was f.x3 and the other one was fx3. Just you know, little oddball notation there. All right, so how does this compare in size to, well, you know what, I have an Pentax ME body, so of course that's a really small bodied SLR. And you can see, you know what, pop off the lens. We'll put that up here. And you can see, really see now how much larger this body is. You can see it back to back when they're back to back. You can all see it when they sit side by side. This, of course, was from the 1970s. This was from the 1950s. So in 20 years, in fact, it was probably 20 years between the production periods of these two cameras. You can really see how Japanese innovation changed 35 millimeter SLRs. And so in this case, you know, that change was for the better. Obviously, electronics allowed them to produce, you know, I think much more accurate exposure. But it also gave us things like this. You know, a film advance with a plastic tip, for example, or a film advance lever at all, getting away from knob wind. And same thing here. You had a rewind crank as opposed to knob wind. You had a press and release rewind button as opposed to the press and hold rewind button. You'll also notice that this camera lacks a self-timer. So if you wanted to take a photo of yourself, you could use a very long cable release, which would thread in here, or you could get somebody else to take the photo for you. There's nothing else really notable about this camera. This camera, if you use it with other lenses, there's no way for you to actuate the aperture. Because as you notice, the early lenses had no pin, had no aperture actuation pin. As I mentioned, this is a preset aperture. And so, for example, if you recall, this is that Soviet Cosmogon lens that I worked on in a different video. Remember, we straightened the filter ring, we cleaned up the lens, we made it so it could focus relatively smoothly. And so while it certainly fits the lens and focuses without a problem, the one issue you have is if you select, let's say, f8, let's keep an eye on that aperture. When you release a shutter, it never closes the aperture. So in this case, you have to use your little button here on there, or your little switch on the bottom here, to go from A, automatic aperture, to M, manual aperture. So if I did want to use the lens on this camera, I probably would first select the aperture we're going to use, focus, and then just before taking the photo, I would close it down to the working aperture, then take the photo, then you can open it again. So it's a much slower process. But I think the world in general was a slower world, certainly slower than what we have today. And so you can see the type of aperture. I don't know how many blades are in here. A lot. I could try to count them, but I actually have better things to do with my life. Let's just say that there are a lot. And so, as we know, in some of the later lenses, they only use 5 aperture blades or 6 aperture blades, because you could actually see the 5-bladed shape or the 6-bladed shape in here. In here, it looks like there's, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something, which makes this a more complicated lens more complex lens, I guess I should say, in that respect. Otherwise, it's a fairly simple lens, because all you have is you have your helical and you have your lens elements, and that's about it. So let's see what this camera and lens weigh. Okay, so the lens and body weigh 1 pound 11.8 ounces, or if we wanted to round up, we could say 1 pound 12 ounces. Let's see what they weigh separately. The body itself weighs 1 pound, 5.7 ounces, or once again rounding 1 pound, 6 ounces. So that means this lens weighs, this is a very lightweight lens. And in fact, it is lightweight, coming in at 6 ounces. How does that compare with another Iron Curtain lens? Let's see how it compares with the Cosmogon. So this is 6 ounces. Take this filter off. And the Cosmogon weighs 10 ounces. This is actually a very hefty 50 millimeter lens. So that is 4 ounces more. Now, we had taken a look at some Rolly planers. And so this one weighs 7.4 ounces. So more than this, but less than the Cosmogon. Of course, this is a very early lens, as you recall. This one does not have an automatic aperture, things like that. So, much earlier lens. So 7.4 ounces versus 6 ounces versus 10 ounces for that Cosmogon. Let's see if I can find something about the lens design here. I found one that shows this as being 5 elements in, I think it's either 3 or 4 groups. 4 groups. That would almost make it a sonar type design. Now, what's interesting is Meyer-Optik Görlitz still exists today, and they are now producing this very same lens. It's known as the Meyer-Optik Primoplan 2, 58 millimeters, f1.9, and so the original also, as you see, is 58 millimeters, f1.9. And that sells for 899 euros, which includes VAT, but does not include shipping costs. So that's probably going to cost you about $1,000 or so US if you decide to purchase that. Makes me wonder, right? All right, so the newer lens is available in many mounts. Canon EF and RF, Fuji X, Leica L, M, and R, M42, MFT, which is Micro Four Thirds, Nikon F and Z, Pentax K, and Sony E. I think if I were to purchase one, because I love the M42 mount, that's probably the one that I would go for, because then the M42 is so easy to adapt to all the other mounts, right? Using a different adapter. So, that might be something we have to consider in the future. And then maybe we'll do a side-by-side. How does a modern-day Primoplan compare with this lens? Okay, so the modern-day lens also is 5 elements and 4 groups, so it looks like they're reproducing the classic lens using the same lens formula. Now, this is pretty cool. See, this really takes you down a road you didn't expect. They also are producing a trioplan. That would be a triplet, of course, and the Biotar, and what's known as the Lydith, L-Y-D-I-T-H. So, yeah, I think you could spend a small fortune repurchasing some of these lenses. So here are some sample photos that I took with this lens, and while it was very clean cosmetically, it certainly was not clean optically, and that would be referring to the lens elements. Some of these photos were taken in black and white, some were color. None of these photos have been retouched. They are straight out of the camera, or straight off the memory card, if you will. You can see in some of these before and after shots before I cleaned the lens, and you can see how hazy it was, or how much haze buildup there was on the lens. It reduced the sharpness, but most of all, it reduced the contrast. And so you can see after I cleaned the lens, the photos not only are sharper and have better resolution, they also have better contrast. But no surprise, if you're shooting through haze, you're essentially, it's really like shooting through a foggy window. So no surprise there. Overall, I think this is a very capable lens in that it can resolve fine detail while also providing nice character to the photos. How do I rate this camera? In this case, I'm going to split it up because I think that there's enough interest in the lens to rate it separately. So this is an instance in which I would rate the lens higher than the body. And I give 8.6 to the body and 9.0 to the lens. With the camera body, I'm not comparing it to what was available from Japan in the 1970s or even the 1960s. I want to compare it to other cameras that were available in that era being the late 1950s. And so if we were to compare it to other cameras that were available, specifically those from West Germany, I think that the FX3 falls down in that it's just missing some things. One of the things it's missing is a pentaprism, so you don't have true reflex viewing, that is to say, eye-level viewing. The other is missing a couple features such as, well, obviously a rapid return mirror, but that wasn't widely available in the industry, so I'm not going to knock it on that. It is missing a self-timer, not a huge deal. The focusing screen, however, is just a plain matte surface. At that time, if you were to look at the Zeiss Icon Contaflex, the Voigtlander Bessamatic, and even the Kodak Retina SLR, you'll find that those three cameras do have some focusing aids in the viewfinder. So by the time that this was released, which would have been the late 1950s, I think it's not unreasonable to expect the Praktica to also have something similar. One advantage that the Praktica has over those other cameras, over its West German counterparts, is that it used a focal plane shutter rather than being restricted to a leaf shutter. Of course, this was the end of the line for the Praktica FX series, and so I think that's probably an indication that, something better was on the horizon. Turning to the lens, I think this lens is quite good. Most of these lenses you're going to find in different conditions, depending on how it was, I guess, maintained through the years, or not maintained. This particular lens, if you notice, is in excellent condition cosmetically. And the lens elements themselves also were in good condition, although soiled and hazy, which I explained earlier. I think the image quality is really good. I try not to judge a lens by how out of focus things appear, but certainly those items in focus are very sharp. Obviously, this is an older lens with the preset aperture and no aperture pin, so you'll need to keep that in mind if you plan to shoot this for digital, or if you plan to use it with another film body. So that's my rating for both the camera body, the Praktica FX3, and the lens, the Meyer-Optik Primoplan. And so now we've come to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. A quick look at one of my rare bargain purchases from a thrift shop. I'm telling you, I think I've only maybe bought 3 or 4 thrift shop cameras. No, 2. Yeah, exactly 2 thrift shop cameras. So the other one being a little Kodak Duo 620, or no, Kodak Duoflex, which took 620 film. And I think I bought that in the 1980s with who else? With my dad. And one of his many thrift shop forays or adventures. Anyway, if you'd like to leave a comment, you can do so below, or you can send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And you can click that icon in the lower right corner of the screen, right down here, for more content about cameras and photography, and I hope that you'll join me on my next video. Remember, always human produced, never AI.